Good evening and welcome, humble viewer. I just wanted to start by saying how happy I am that you can join me for this journey. And if you could find a second, I would love if you could leave a comment on where in the world you are tuning in from and what time it may be for you. Now try to find a quiet moment. Let the noise of your world, the hum of electricity, the chatter of the news, the steady, insistent ticking of your clock, recede into a distant murmur. We are about to undertake a journey to a time before time, to a place that was not yet a place. We are traveling to the very edge of existence, to the profound and unsettling silence that preceded the first word, to the absolute darkness that preceded the first flicker of light. We are going to the beginning. The story of Adam and Eve is arguably the most foundational narrative in the Western canon, a story we think we know with a deep, primal familiarity. It is the first story many of us are ever told, a seemingly simple and mythic fable of a primordial garden, a cunning serpent, a forbidden apple, and a tragic fall from grace. But to read it this way, as a quaint piece of religious folklore or a straightforward morality tale, is to see only the shimmering surface of a terrifyingly deep and dark ocean of meaning. To truly understand this story, to feel its full, crushing weight, we must see it not as a children's tale, but as a profound and deeply unsettling work of existential horror. It is the story of the birth of the human condition itself, a condition defined by consciousness, by labor, by shame, by suffering, and by the shocking, unwelcome knowledge of our own mortality. And to comprehend the depth of the tragedy that would befall the first man and the first woman, we must first dare to confront the terrifying, lonely, and utterly inscrutable nature of the being who created them, and the strange, violent, and paradoxical world that was born from its solitary, unknowable will. Before the garden, before the man of clay, before the light itself, there was, as the ancient and poetic text of Genesis tells us, only a void. The Hebrew phrase is tohu wa bohu. These are words that defy easy translation, words that carry a weight of profound desolation, formless and void, waste and emptiness, confusion and chaos. It is a state that is almost impossible for the human mind, a mind that craves order, distinction, and narrative. To fully and truly comprehend, we must try. We must attempt to strip away our ingrained understanding of reality and imagine a state of pure, undifferentiated non-being. It is not just darkness, because our concept of darkness is defined by its relationship to light. This was a darkness that had no opposite, a primal, absolute, and eternal blackness that was not the absence of something, but the totality of everything. It was not just silence, because our concept of silence is the absence of sound, which requires a medium like air through which to travel. This was a silence that was pre-sonic, a stillness that was absolute because there was nothing to move, nothing to vibrate. The text tells us that darkness was over the surface of the deep, and that the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Imagine this, a universe that is nothing but a single, infinite, cosmic ocean of chaos. A primordial sea without a surface, for there is no air above it, without a floor, for there is no land beneath it, without a shore, for there is nothing that is not it. There is no up or down, no here or there, no then or now. There is no time, for time is a measurement of change, and in this unified, featureless state, nothing changes. There is only a single, eternal, and terrifyingly monotonous state of non-being. This is the womb of the universe, a place of pure, limitless potentiality, but also of pure, absolute nothingness. It is the canvas upon which the story will be painted, and the canvas itself is made of darkness and water. And moving over the face of these dark waters, the sole exception to the universal stillness is the Ruach Elohim. This Hebrew phrase is as complex and resonant as tohu wa bohu. Ruach can be translated as spirit, but it can also mean wind or breath. Elohim is one of the primary names for God in the Hebrew Bible, a plural form that hints at majesty or perhaps at a forgotten polytheistic past, but which is used here with a singular verb, denoting a single, supreme entity. So, this is the Spirit of God, the wind of God, the breath of God. This is our very first glimpse of the Creator, and it is a glimpse of profound, staggering, and almost unimaginable solitude. The God of Genesis 1 is utterly, absolutely, and cosmically alone. He exists in a state that the theologians would later define as aseity, a state of pure, uncaused, and self-sufficient being. He has no beginning and no end. He is timeless, changeless, perfect. But he is also in a state of perfect and absolute isolation. There is no other being in the vast, dark emptiness of existence to see him, to speak with him, to know him, to challenge him, to love him, or to worship him. He is a singular consciousness adrift in an infinite void of his own making. The text offers no explanation for his existence. He simply is. It is the ultimate brute fact of reality. And more unsettlingly, it offers no clear motivation for what he is about to do. This is the first and perhaps the deepest existential horror embedded in the Genesis story, the inscrutability of the divine will. Why does a being who is described as perfect, self-sufficient, and eternal decide to create? What need could such a being have? The traditional comforting answer, developed over centuries of theological reflection, is that creation is an act of love, a benevolent and generous overflowing of divine goodness. God creates in this view not because he needs anything, but because his nature is love, and love, by its nature, desires to share itself. But the text of Genesis 1 itself does not explicitly state this. The tone is not one of gentle, loving artistry. The language is stark, powerful, and almost violent. The act of creation as it unfolds seems less like a tender act of nurturing love and more like a series of forceful, almost desperate assertions of will against a passive and formless chaos. It is as if the eternal solitude has become unbearable, the cosmic silence too profound to endure any longer. The creation of the universe can be read not as an act of pure generosity, but as the act of a profoundly lonely God creating something, anything, to reflect his own existence back at him, to fill the terrifying, eternal silence with the echo of his own voice. And so he speaks. The first act of creation is a speech act. And God said, "Let there be light." The word becomes reality. This is the quintessential expression of divine power. But what is the nature of this first act? It is a profound and fundamental act of division. The unified, absolute, primordial darkness is shattered. The universe, which was one, is now cleaved in two. There is now light and there is now darkness. The text is explicit about this. And he separated the light from the darkness. He then proceeds to perform an act of naming, an assertion of mastery and control. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. The act of naming is the act of imposing a conceptual order, a human-like system of understanding onto the raw stuff of existence. But the act of separation is the key. The entire 6-day process of creation, as described in the majestic, rhythmic prose of Genesis, is a sequence of these violent separations. God does not, in this narrative, create things ex nihilo, out of nothing. He creates by dividing what already exists. He speaks again, and a vault, or firmament, is created to separate the waters above from the waters below, creating the sky and the sea. This is another act of cosmic cleavage, the imposition of a boundary within the unified chaotic ocean. Then he gathers the waters below into one place to let the dry ground appear. He separates the water from the land. He is a God of boundaries, of distinctions, of separations. He is imposing order on the chaos, but this order is not a gentle coaxing or a natural unfolding. It is a series of cosmic severances, a process of wounding the primordial unity of the void in order to create distinction and form. This foundational theme of separation, of being cut off from a previous unified and perhaps unconscious state, will echo with terrifying force through the story of the fall of man. The very act of creation is presented as the first exile. It is the exile of order from chaos, of being from non-being, of distinction from unity. For 5 days, this process of separation and ordering continues. The Creator builds his world with a kind of relentless, almost obsessive architectural precision. He populates the land with vegetation, each plant yielding seed according to its kind. He populates the skies with the sun, the moon, and the stars, not just as sources of light, but as celestial timekeepers, to separate the day from the night, and to serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. He is building a world of regularity, of cycles, of predictable order. He then fills the seas with fish and the air with birds, commanding them to be fruitful and increase in number, to fill the spaces he has created for them. At each stage of this grand cosmic construction project, the text repeats a strange and haunting refrain, "And God saw that it was good." This phrase, repeated like a mantra, is profoundly revealing. It is a statement of divine satisfaction, the artist stepping back to admire his own work. It is a declaration of quality control, but it also carries a deep undercurrent of the creator's profound and unshakable solitude. It is the voice of a being who is the sole witness and the sole judge of his own creation. There is no one else to offer an opinion, no one else to share in the wonder, no one else to validate his work. It is the lonely, self-referential pronouncement of a singular mind, affirming the products of its own will in a universe that is still, for all its new complexity, utterly silent. The goodness that God sees is not an intrinsic moral goodness. It is a functional goodness. The world is good because it perfectly conforms to his design. It is good because it is ordered, because it is structured, because each created thing performs its designated function within the grand hierarchical system he has built. It is the goodness of a perfect machine, a flawless clockwork universe. The cosmic stage was now set. The violent acts of separation were complete. The formless void had been subdued, wrestled into a world of light and darkness, of land and sea, of celestial cycles and teeming, non-sentient life. The universe was a perfect, ordered and functional machine, a testament to the absolute power of its solitary creator. It was good, it was complete, but it was also, in a profound sense, empty. It was a kingdom without a king, a theatre without an audience, a house without an inhabitant. The final act of creation was about to take place, the introduction of a being who would not just inhabit the world, but would be its steward, its master, and ultimately its tragic flaw. This was to be the creation of man, an act described with a stark and terrifying physicality that strips away all romanticism and reveals the deep, unsettling strangeness of being the first. The text tells us that God formed the man from the dust of the ground. We must pause here and contemplate the immense weight of this imagery. He did not conjure the man from pure light or weave him from the fabric of the heavens. He chose the most humble, most common, and most lifeless of materials, dust. Adamah in Hebrew, the very word from which the man, Adam, would take his name. He is, from his very first moment, inextricably linked to the earth, to the soil, to the grit and grime of the physical world. This is a profound statement of humanity's nature. We are not ethereal spirits, we are animated clay. Our origin is not in the celestial, but in the terrestrial. This act carries with it the seed of our own mortality, the echo of the final curse that has not yet been spoken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return. The end is encoded in the beginning. Imagine the process itself as a divine and therefore terrifying act of sculpture. A divine intelligence, whose thoughts are galaxies and whose hands shape the mountains, kneels to the earth. It gathers a handful of dust, of red clay, of common dirt. There is an intimacy here, a direct, physical contact that is absent in the previous acts of creation, which were accomplished through speech alone. God does not say, "Let there be man." He forms him. His hands work the clay, shaping a form in his own image. What does this image, this imago Dei, truly mean? It is not a simple physical resemblance, for the God of Genesis is a bodiless cosmic entity. It must be something deeper. It is perhaps the image of sovereignty, the capacity for dominion and rule over the lower creations. It is perhaps the image of reason, the capacity for thought, for language, for naming. Or perhaps, in a more tragic and ironic sense, it is the image of will, the terrifying capacity for choice, for freedom, for rebellion. He is shaping a creature that is a paradox, a being of humble dust, yet stamped with the likeness of divine authority and freedom. The form lies there, a perfect but lifeless sculpture of clay on the ground. It has eyes but does not see, lungs but does not breathe, a mind but does not think. It is a thing, an object, a masterpiece of divine craft, but it is not yet a person. And then comes the second, even more intimate and unsettling act. The text says the Creator breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. This is an act of shocking proximity, a divine mouth-to-mouth resuscitation that transfers a portion of the divine essence, the ruach, the same spirit or breath that hovered over the waters of chaos, directly into the vessel of clay. Try to imagine the horror and the wonder of that first moment of consciousness. It is not the gentle, gradual awakening of a baby. It is an instantaneous, violent eruption of being. One moment, there is only the dreamless, timeless non-existence of clay. The next, there is light, sound, sensation, thought, self. The universe floods into a mind that has no context for it. Adam's first experience is not of a mother's face or the warmth of a cradle. His first experience is of the full, overwhelming and unmediated reality of a world that is already ancient and complete. He opens his eyes to see the face of his Creator, a being of unimaginable power and otherness. He has no childhood, no memory, no past. He does not know how he came to be or what he is. He possesses a fully formed adult body, but his mind is a perfect, terrifying blank slate. He is an amnesiac God, born into a world he is supposed to rule but does not understand. This is the first and most profound form of alienation. He is a stranger in his own life, a creature without an origin story, his only reality the immediate, shocking present and the inscrutable presence of the being who made him. This new conscious being is then placed within a specially prepared environment, the Garden of Eden. The garden is described in terms of perfection and beauty. It is a paradise, a place where all needs are met. A river flows out of Eden to water the garden, a source of effortless life. The trees are pleasing to the eye and good for food. There is gold and aromatic resin and onyx. It is a place of immense wealth and sensory pleasure, but we must look deeper than this surface beauty. The Garden of Eden, in a very real sense, can be seen as a perfect, gilded prison. It is a place of absolute, curated control. It is a world without lack. The food is freely available. The water flows without effort. The climate is presumably perfect. But a world without lack is also a world without desire, without struggle, without ambition, and therefore without meaning. The human spirit is forged in the crucible of striving against obstacles. In Eden, there are no obstacles. It is a world of profound and total stasis. Nothing needs to be accomplished because everything is already perfect. It is a beautiful, enclosed, and fundamentally unfree environment. A divine terrarium designed to keep its single inhabitant in a state of perpetual, blissful, and ignorant contentment. Adam's role in this garden is not to create or to strive, but to work it and take care of it. He is not a king, he is a gardener. He is the caretaker of a museum in which nothing is allowed to change. This seemingly benevolent paradise is, in fact, the setting for his first great existential crisis. God then brings to the man every beast of the field and every bird in the sky to see what he would name them. This is Adam's first and only divinely assigned task in the garden. On the surface, it appears to be a confirmation of his dominion, the act of a king surveying his subjects and assigning them their place in the order of things. The power to name is the power to define, to categorize, to control. As Adam gives a name to the lion, the eagle, the serpent, he is participating in the divine act of ordering the universe. But we must imagine this process from Adam's own perspective. It is not a triumphant parade. It is a profound and systematic exercise in alienation. Imagine the procession. The animals are brought before him, and the text is clear that they are brought in their pairs. He sees the lion and the lioness. He sees the bull and the cow. He sees the male eagle and its mate. He sees a world of creatures that are complete in their two-ness. Each has its partner, its other half, a being of its own kind with which to share its existence. He, the great namer, the steward of this world, watches this endless parade of pairs. And with every name he speaks, the silence that follows is a fresh reminder of his own monstrous solitude. He gives them their names, and they go on their way, together. He remains behind, alone. The task that was meant to confirm his dominion becomes a divinely orchestrated lesson in his own unique and terrible isolation. The text concludes the episode with a statement of heartbreaking simplicity. But for Adam, no suitable helper was found. The entire animal kingdom has been paraded before him, and the result is a confirmation of his absolute otherness. He is the ultimate anomaly in the perfect system he is supposed to rule. He is the only creature who is a one. This is the first loneliness, a cosmic solitude so profound that it will be the first thing in all of creation that God himself will declare to be not good. It is in this context of a curated, static paradise and a profound, soul-deep loneliness that we must now turn our attention to the two mysterious and terrifying objects that stand at the very center of the garden and at the center of this entire story. The text tells us, in the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. These are not ordinary trees. They are mythological, archetypal entities, the twin pillars upon which the entire human drama will turn. Their very presence in the garden is a profound and troubling paradox. First, let us consider the tree of life. Its existence in the garden poses a critical theological question. If Eden is a paradise, a place of perfect and unending life, why is a tree of life necessary? Its presence implies that immortality is not the default state of the man of clay. He is not created as an eternal being. He is created as a mortal, a creature of dust, whose continued existence is conditional upon his access to this tree. To live forever, he must continually eat its fruit. This makes his life in paradise a fragile and contingent thing from the very start. He is a tenant, not an owner, and his lease on eternal life depends on his continued access to this one, specific source of divine sustenance. Why would a benevolent creator design his perfect world in this way? It introduces an element of precarity, of dependence, into a world that is supposed to be one of effortless perfection. The tree of life is not just a symbol of eternal life. It is a symbol of Adam's inherent vulnerability, but it is the second tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that is the true engine of the coming catastrophe. Its existence is the central, baffling, and terrifying mystery of the Eden narrative. God, having placed the man in this garden of delights, issues a single, stark prohibition. You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. This is a command that is so fraught with contradiction, so pregnant with evil potential, that it demands to be examined from every possible angle. Why would a perfect creator, who has just declared his entire creation to be good, deliberately place a source of death, a metaphysical poison, in the very heart of his perfect world? Why plant a tree whose fruit brings mortality and then forbid your new, precious creation from eating it? This is not just a strange detail, it is the fundamental, destabilizing paradox of the entire story. The most traditional and long-standing interpretation is that the tree is a test of obedience. God, as the divine sovereign, has the right to command his subjects. The prohibition is not about the intrinsic nature of the fruit, but about the principle of loyalty. The test is to see if the man, who has been given everything, will obey this one, simple and seemingly arbitrary rule. It is a test of his love and his fealty. But if this is a test, it is a profoundly unfair and almost cruel one. The man, Adam, has been created in a state of perfect innocence. The tree is, by its very name, the source of the knowledge of good and evil. This implies that before eating the fruit, Adam does not possess this knowledge. He exists in a state of moral ignorance. How then can he be expected to understand the moral weight of his own actions? How can he comprehend the evil of disobedience if he does not yet know what evil is? He is being asked to make a moral choice without the moral framework necessary to make it. To punish a being for failing a test that he is, by his very nature, incapable of understanding, seems less like the action of a benevolent father and more like the action of a capricious and inscrutable tyrant. It is a trap. A second interpretation, more mystical and paradoxical, is that the tree is a necessary catalyst, a deliberate flaw introduced into the system by a God who understands that true personhood requires more than just blissful ignorance. In this view, the state of innocence in Eden is not the ultimate goal. It is a childish, incomplete state. To become fully human, to become truly in the image of God, Adam must move beyond this state of passive contentment. He must acquire consciousness, self-awareness, moral agency, and free will. The tree of knowledge is the gateway to this higher, though far more painful, state of being. God forbids it, perhaps, not because he truly wants the man to abstain, but because he needs the man to choose it. The act of disobedience, in this reading, is the first and most crucial act of human freedom, a necessary transgression that allows humanity to begin its long, painful journey towards self-realization. The command is a form of divine reverse psychology, a test whose only correct answer is failure. This is the idea that would later be called the felix culpa, the fortunate fall. It is a compelling and poetically satisfying idea, but it also paints a picture of a God who is manipulative and obscure, who plays complex psychological games with his own creations. A third and much darker interpretation is that the tree is a symbol of divine insecurity, of a creator who fears his own creation. In this reading, God forbids the man from eating the fruit because he fears a rival. The knowledge of good and evil is a divine prerogative, a quality that separates God from his creatures. By eating the fruit, the man would be like God, knowing good and evil, as the serpent will later claim. The prohibition, then, is an act of jealous gatekeeping. God wants his creation to remain ignorant, innocent, and therefore pliable and subservient. He does not want a partner or a peer, he wants an obedient pet. The tree of knowledge represents a power that the Creator hoards for himself, and the command is a threat designed to maintain the absolute, unbridgeable gap between the divine and the human. In this view, the God of the garden is a tyrant who builds a paradise but makes true wisdom a capital crime. Regardless of which interpretation one chooses, the presence of these two trees at the center of the garden transforms it from a simple paradise into a landscape of profound existential tension. Adam, the man of clay, now finds himself in an impossible position. He is alone, a singular being in a world of pairs. He is a king who is also a gardener. He is an immortal being whose life is conditional, and he lives in a world of perfect goodness that contains a single, alluring and deadly source of evil, a temptation that has been placed at the very center of his world by the same being who has forbidden him from touching it. The stage is perfectly set. The lonely man in his perfect prison is about to receive a companion, and together they will be faced with a choice that was, perhaps, already made for them from the very beginning. The tragedy is not that the man will fall, the tragedy is that he was designed to. The man of clay was now complete, yet the world he inhabited, for all its curated perfection, was defined by a profound and echoing silence. He was the master of a garden in which he had no peer, the solitary king of a kingdom of beasts that could offer him no companionship. His existence was a paradox, a being made in the divine image, yet afflicted with a cosmic loneliness so vast that it would provoke the first and only moment of divine dissatisfaction in the entire creation narrative. The perfect clockwork universe, which had been repeatedly declared good, was now found to contain a flaw. And so the Creator, the divine architect, utters a phrase of stunning significance. It is not good for the man to be alone. This statement is a theological earthquake. It is the first time in the majestic, rhythmic account of Genesis that the word not is paired with the word good. Up until this point, the Creator's will has been absolute and his creations flawless. But here, God himself acknowledges an imperfection, a problem, a lack in his own design. The solitude of Adam is not just a passing mood, it is a fundamental flaw in the structure of paradise. This raises a host of troubling and profound questions. Did the omniscient Creator not foresee this loneliness? Was it an oversight in his grand design, a miscalculation that now required a corrective measure? Or was this loneliness a deliberate and necessary part of the plan, a state of being that Adam had to experience in its full, crushing weight before he could truly appreciate its remedy? In this latter, more unsettling view, God is not merely solving a problem, he is creating a need. He allows Adam to experience the full, alienating force of his own solitude, a solitude that God, as the ultimate singular being, understands better than anyone, in order to prepare him for the arrival of another. He makes Adam feel the disease of loneliness so that he can recognize the cure. The creation of Eve, then, is not an afterthought. It is the planned second act of the human drama, an act that will solve one problem, solitude, while simultaneously introducing a host of new and far more complex ones. Desire, vulnerability, dependence, and the very concept of the self. The text says, "I will make a helper suitable for him." The Hebrew word for helper is ezer, a term that is often misinterpreted as implying a subordinate or servant. But in the Hebrew Bible, ezer is most frequently used to describe God himself, as a source of divine aid and strength. It does not imply hierarchy, but a powerful and necessary partnership. The word suitable is a translation of kenegdo, a wonderfully ambiguous term which means something like facing him, opposite him, or corresponding to him. She is to be his counterpart, his mirror image, a being who is both like him and fundamentally other than him. She is the answer to the question that was silently posed during the naming of the animals. And so, God once again becomes a surgeon, and the creation of the woman is described with a visceral, mythic, and deeply strange physicality. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. This is not an ordinary sleep. It is a divine anesthetic slumber, a tardima, a trance-like state that removes Adam's consciousness from the procedure. Unlike the creation of the animals, which he witnessed and named, the creation of his counterpart is something he is not permitted to see. It is a sacred and mysterious operation, performed upon his own unconscious body. While he sleeps, God took one of the man's ribs and then closed up the place with flesh. This is a startling and powerful image. The woman is not formed from the dust of the ground, as the man was. She is not a separate, independent creation. She is taken from the very substance of the man himself, from his side, from a place close to his heart. This act establishes an unbreakable, primordial bond between them. They are, in a literal, physical sense, bone of one bone. This act of surgical creation has been interpreted in countless ways over the millennia. To some, it establishes a natural hierarchy. The woman is created from the man and for the man, making her secondary, a derivative being. This interpretation has been used for centuries to justify patriarchal social structures. But to others, the story suggests a profound and radical equality. The woman is made from the same essential matter as the man, not from his head to rule over him, nor from his feet to be trampled by him, but from his side, to stand as his equal partner. Furthermore, the man is now, in a sense, incomplete without her. A part of him has been removed to create her. She is the missing piece of himself that he will forever be drawn to, a concept that forms the deep, mythic root of romantic and erotic love. Then comes the final act of this divine surgery. And the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man. The Hebrew word for made here is yibben, which literally means to build or to construct, as one would build a house. It is an act of careful, deliberate architecture. The Creator takes the raw material of the rib and builds it into a new being, a person. And then, in a moment of cosmic revelation, he brought her to the man. Adam awakes from his deep sleep. He awakes from the solitude that has defined his entire existence. And for the very first time, he sees another being who is like him. He sees his kenegdo, his counterpart. His reaction is not one of simple surprise. It is a burst of ecstatic, poetic recognition, the first recorded words of poetry in the Bible. "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." This moment is the single most important and transformative event in the prelapsarian world. It is the moment that Adam, and by extension humanity, truly becomes human. The arrival of Eve shatters his solitude, but in doing so, it accomplishes something far more profound. It creates the concept of the self. A self cannot exist in a vacuum. The I can only be truly understood, truly defined in its relationship to a you. As long as Adam was alone, he was a singular consciousness, but he was not truly a self-conscious individual. He was like a person who has never seen a mirror. He has no way of seeing himself from the outside, no way of understanding his own boundaries. Eve is the first mirror. In her face, in her form, which is both like and unlike his own, he sees himself for the first time. His ecstatic cry, "This is now bone of my bones," is not just a statement of biological origin, it is a cry of self-recognition. In recognizing her as being of him, he simultaneously recognizes his own I. This is the birth of the first relationship, the first love, the first moment of true communion. But embedded within this beautiful moment of connection is the seed of all future human vulnerability. To have a relationship with an other is to become dependent on that other. Adam's state of perfect, self-contained, if lonely existence is now over. His happiness, his sense of completeness, is now tied to another being, a being with her own will, her own thoughts, her own desires. This introduces an element of profound risk and uncertainty into his world. Love is the cure for loneliness, but it is also the source of our deepest potential for pain, for loss, for jealousy, for betrayal. The creation of Eve is the creation of the possibility of heartbreak. The text then concludes this chapter with a statement that serves as both a theological explanation for the institution of marriage and a profound psychological observation. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. This idea of becoming one flesh is a powerful echo of their shared origin, a desire to return to the state of primordial unity that existed before the rib was separated from the man. Human love, in this view, is a kind of sacred nostalgia, a lifelong quest to heal the wound of our own separateness, to find the missing part of ourselves in another. And then comes the final, crucial, and deeply enigmatic description of their state of being. Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. This is one of the most heavily freighted sentences in all of Western literature, a description of a lost state of innocence that has haunted the human imagination for millennia. But what does it truly mean to be naked and unashamed? The traditional interpretation sees this as a state of pure, childlike, prelapsarian innocence. They were without sin, and therefore they were without the knowledge of their own sexuality as something potentially lustful or transgressive. Their nakedness was as natural and unremarkable as the nakedness of the animals they lived among. They were physically exposed, but spiritually and psychologically, they had nothing to hide. Their inner state perfectly matched their outer appearance. There was no division between the soul and the body. This is the vision of Eden as a place of beautiful, unself-conscious simplicity. But there is a darker, more unsettling way to read this passage. The absence of shame might not imply a state of higher innocence, but a state of profound, almost animal-like ignorance. Shame is not just about sexuality. It is a deeply complex human emotion, intrinsically linked to self-consciousness. We feel shame when we become aware of ourselves being seen by others, when we are judged, when we perceive a gap between who we are and who we believe we ought to be. Shame requires a highly developed sense of self, an awareness of social norms, and the ability to see oneself from an external perspective. To be without shame, then, may be to be without this complex, self-aware consciousness. In this reading, the state of Adam and Eve in the garden is not one of angelic purity, but of a kind of blissful, subhuman ignorance. They are like children, or perhaps even like intelligent animals, living entirely in the present moment, their needs met, their consciousness unburdened by the terrible weight of self-reflection. They are not yet fully human, because the very thing that defines the human condition, our self-awareness, our I, is precisely what gives rise to our capacity for shame, for anxiety, for guilt, for regret. Their nakedness is not a symbol of their innocence, but of their unawareness. They are not yet burdened with the knowledge that they are naked, that they are vulnerable, that they are separate beings. This state of unashamed nakedness is the perfect, static, and ultimately inhuman equilibrium of the garden. It is the state of being that the Creator has deemed good, but it is an equilibrium that is about to be shattered. The arrival of Eve has introduced the concept of the other. It has created the first we. And this we is now a dyad, a unit of two, capable of communication, of shared experience, and of secrets. The solitary Adam could not have a secret from God, but Adam and Eve together can. They now have a shared perspective, a world that is their own, separate from that of their Creator. The stage is now perfectly set for the drama of the fall. All the necessary components are in place. There is the forbidden tree, the symbol of a knowledge that is off limits. There is the man, a creature of dust and divine breath, now keenly aware of his own solitude. And now there is the woman, his perfect counterpart, the mirror of his soul, the cure for his loneliness, and the partner with whom he will share his terrible choice. They stand together in the garden, naked and unaware, two beings poised on the brink of a cataclysm. They are about to be approached by a third party, a creature who will not offer them food or comfort, but will offer them a single, seductive, and world-shattering question. The perfect, silent, unself-conscious harmony of Eden is about to be broken forever, not by a roar of divine judgment, but by a quiet, intelligent, and irresistible whisper from the branches of a tree. The birth of their relationship was the end of Adam's simple solitude. The birth of their consciousness will be the end of their paradise. The world of the first humans was now complete, a diorama of curated perfection. It was a world of effortless sustenance, of gentle rhythms, a paradise defined by a single, stark, and deeply puzzling prohibition. At the very center of the garden, at the symbolic and literal heart of their existence, stood the two mysterious archetypal trees, one offering the perpetuation of their blissful, static life, the other offering a forbidden, and therefore magnetically alluring, form of knowledge. The man and the woman, Adam and Eve, existed in a state of unself-conscious innocence, a shared solitude that had been remedied by a shared substance. Their relationship was a perfect, unbroken communion, their nakedness a sign not of poverty, but of a profound ignorance of their own vulnerability. But this static perfection, this blissful, pre-conscious harmony, was not a stable state. It was a paradise holding its breath, a perfectly constructed stage waiting for the arrival of the third actor, the one who would introduce the necessary element of conflict into the narrative. The story required a catalyst, a voice that would not command like gods, but would question. It needed a mind that would not offer comfort, but would plant the first, fertile seed of doubt. This voice would belong to the most enigmatic, the most controversial, and the most intellectually formidable character in the entire narrative, the serpent. It is from the mouth of this creature that the first whispers of philosophical rebellion will poison the profound silence of Eden, and its temptation will not be one of simple, carnal appetite for a sweet fruit, but a far more potent, dangerous, and world-shattering seduction, the seduction of the intellect itself. The text introduces this new and pivotal character with a stark, declarative, and chillingly simple sentence. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. We must pause and dissect this description with the care of a surgeon, for it is almost all the text gives us, and every word is laden with immense theological and psychological weight. The creature is not, in this initial introduction, presented as a supernatural monster or a demonic entity from another realm. It is explicitly categorized as one of the wild animals, a beast of the field, a part of God's own good creation. It is, in this sense, a natural creature, a product of the same world as Adam and Eve. Yet, it is immediately set apart from all others by a single, superlative quality. It is more arum, a rich Hebrew word that is difficult to capture with a single English equivalent. It means crafty, subtle, shrewd, prudent, or cunning. It implies a quality of mind, a strategic, tactical intelligence, a capacity for subtle reasoning and persuasive rhetoric that the other beasts of the field lack. The serpent is a creature of the natural world, but it possesses a supernatural level of insight and eloquence. This immediate framing establishes a profound and deeply unsettling ambiguity that will ripple through the entire story. Is the serpent merely a talking animal, a feature of a mythic, fable-like world where the boundaries between human and beast are not yet fixed, similar to the talking animals in Aesop's fables or other ancient mythologies? In this reading, the story is a primordial myth, and the serpent is an allegorical figure representing the power of clever, deceptive speech. Or is its animal form a disguise, a vessel for a far more significant and powerful entity? Later theological traditions, in both post-biblical Judaism and especially in Christianity, would overwhelmingly and definitively identify the serpent of Genesis with Satan, the great adversary of God, the fallen angel Lucifer. This interpretation, powerfully reinforced by passages in the New Testament such as the book of Revelation, which speaks of that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray, gives the story a clear-cut moral and dramatic structure. It becomes a direct, cosmic confrontation between the forces of absolute good, God and his innocent human creations, and the forces of absolute evil, Satan, seeking to corrupt and destroy them out of envy and spite. This reading makes the serpent a being of pure, unadulterated malice. His temptation is not a random act of mischief. It is a carefully planned military strike in the great spiritual war, an act of cosmic spite against the God who cast him out of heaven. His goal is to ruin God's new, beloved creation, to drag humanity down into his own state of rebellion and damnation. This is the orthodox and most widely known interpretation, and it provides a satisfyingly dualistic framework for the narrative. But within the text of Genesis itself, this identification is never explicitly made. The serpent is simply the serpent, the most cunning of the beasts. This textual ambiguity, this deliberate silence on the creature's ultimate identity, allows for other, perhaps more philosophically complex and psychologically unsettling interpretations. Could the serpent be a rival divine force? A remnant of an older polytheistic worldview that the monotheistic editors of Genesis absorbed and demoted? In many ancient Near Eastern and Mediterranean cultures, the serpent was a powerful and often revered symbol. It was not inherently evil. It was frequently associated with wisdom, with healing, as in the rod of Asclepius, still a symbol of medicine today, with fertility and with eternal life due to its ability to shed its skin and be seemingly reborn. The great goddesses of the Minoans were depicted holding serpents. The Egyptian pharaohs wore the uraeus, a cobra symbol of divine authority. In this reading, the story of Eden is not a simple tale of good versus evil, but a mythological record of a clash between two competing worldviews, two different kinds of gods. There is the patriarchal, celestial, order-giving sky god, Yahweh, and there is a chthonic, earthly, and wisdom-giving serpent deity, perhaps associated with an older, goddess-centric religion. The serpent's temptation, in this light, is an invitation for humanity to align itself with an alternative source of wisdom and power. Or perhaps, in a more modern psychological reading, the serpent is not an external entity at all, but an internal one. It could be seen as the personification of a voice that was already awakening within the human mind itself, specifically within Eve. It is the voice of doubt, of burgeoning curiosity, of the nascent human intellect beginning to strain against the arbitrary boundaries of its own existence. The serpent is the externalization of her own growing desire to know why, to understand the reason behind the prohibition, to move beyond the blissful but fundamentally confining ignorance of her paradise home. He is the first philosopher, the first skeptic, the first lawyer, giving voice to the critical questions that were already beginning to form in the profound silence of the garden. He represents the birth of the critical faculty, the part of the human mind that refuses to accept authority without question. Regardless of which interpretation we favor, the malevolent Satan, the rival god, or the personified inner voice, the serpent's strategy of temptation is a timeless masterpiece of psychological manipulation, a masterclass in rhetoric and persuasion. His first move is a subtle but brilliant one. He does not approach Adam, the first formed, the one who had received the divine prohibition directly from the mouth of God. He approaches the woman, Eve. This choice has been the subject of intense commentary for centuries, much of it deeply misogynistic. The traditional Augustinian reading, which has dominated Western thought, sees this as a targeted attack on the weaker vessel. The serpent approaches Eve because she is seen as more gullible, more emotionally volatile, more susceptible to flattery and deception than the man. Her temptation is a failure of female weakness, and her subsequent offering of the fruit to Adam is the act of a temptress, leading the stronger but passive man into sin. This interpretation has been used for millennia to justify the subjugation of women and to lay the primary blame for the fall of man at their feet. But a closer and more generous reading of the text allows for a radically different interpretation. The serpent may have approached Eve not because she was the weaker of the two, but precisely because she was the more intellectually curious, the more courageous, the more philosophically adventurous, and therefore the more interesting conversationalist. Adam had received the divine prohibition directly from God. For him, it was a simple, non-negotiable, top-down command. It was a brute fact of his existence. But Eve, according to the narrative's timeline, was created after this command was given to Adam. This means she received the prohibition second-hand, presumably relayed to her by Adam. For her, it is not a direct experience of divine authority. It is a piece of reported information, a rule passed down through a chain of command. And any piece of information that is transmitted is, by its very nature, open to interpretation, to questioning, to doubt. The serpent, in his cunning, does not target the passive recipient of a command. He targets the active thinker, the one for whom the rule is not a memory of an event, but a concept to be analyzed. His opening line is a masterstroke of subtle, corrosive insinuation. He does not issue a command, he does not make a threat, he does not offer a bribe. He asks a seemingly innocent question, a question designed to gently probe for weakness and to sow the first tiny seed of doubt in the fertile ground of Eve's mind. He slithers up to her and asks, with a tone of polite, feigned curiosity, "Did God really say, 'You must not eat from any tree in the garden'?" This is a deliberate and brilliant misrepresentation of the divine command. It is a classic straw man argument. He takes God's overwhelmingly generous permission, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but," and maliciously reframes it as a harsh, tyrannical, and absolute prohibition. He makes God sound like a stingy, restrictive despot who has created a beautiful garden full of delicious fruit and then forbidden his creations from enjoying any of it. He is painting a picture of God not as a benevolent provider, but as an arbitrary and unfair ruler. He is trying to provoke a sense of injustice and resentment in Eve, to make her feel that God's law is unreasonable. He is creating a problem where none existed, subtly positioning himself as a sympathetic listener who understands her plight. Eve's response is immediate, intelligent, and crucial. She is not a passive, gullible victim of his deception. She is an active and engaged participant in this theological debate. She immediately and accurately corrects the serpent's gross misrepresentation. "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden," she clarifies, setting the record straight. "But God did say, 'You must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die.'" This response is revealing in several ways. Firstly, it shows that Eve is not easily fooled. She knows the rule perfectly and is willing to defend God's reputation against the serpent's slander. Secondly, her formulation of the rule is slightly different from the one God originally gave to Adam. She adds a new clause, "and you must not touch it." Where did this addition come from? It is not present in the original divine command recorded in Genesis 2. Is this an embellishment on her part, a sign of her own scrupulous, perhaps even anxious, piety? Is she trying to demonstrate to the serpent how seriously she takes the prohibition? Or, more intriguingly, was this an extra layer of prohibition added by Adam when he relayed the command to her? Did the man, in his own anxiety, build a fence around the Torah, adding a secondary rule to ensure the primary one would not be broken? Whatever its source, This small addition reveals that the divine law is already not a static, unchanging text, but a living tradition, subject to human transmission, interpretation, and even amendment. This small crack in the perfection of the transmission is the opening the serpent needs. The serpent, having tested the waters and having found Eve to be an intelligent, articulate, and perhaps slightly anxious debater, now moves in for the kill. He abandons the pretense of polite Socratic inquiry and makes a direct, two-pronged frontal assault on the very foundation of the divine command. He attacks its stated consequence and he attacks its hidden motivation. First, he flatly and audaciously contradicts God's solemn warning. "You will not certainly die," he declares. The Hebrew is even stronger. Lomot temutun, a powerful double negative. Dying, you will not die. It is an absolute negation of the divine word. This is a moment of profound and shocking cosmic crisis. The woman is now presented with two directly conflicting truth claims from two powerful and supernatural authorities. The first is from God, the creator of the universe, a being of unimaginable power but who is also distant, commanding, and whose ultimate motives are opaque. The second is from the serpent, a creature of the earth, a being who is physically present, conversational, and who is about to offer a compelling, alternative explanation for the state of affairs. Eve is being forced into an unprecedented position. She is being forced to act as a judge, to use her own reason, her own intellect, to adjudicate a dispute between God and one of his creatures. She is being asked to choose who to believe. This is the birth of human critical thinking, and the narrative frames it as a diabolical act. Having shattered the certainty of the consequence, the serpent immediately provides a motive for the divine deception. He explains why God would lie to them. "For God knows," he says, leaning in with the conspiratorial, intimate tone of one sharing a forbidden, liberating secret, "that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." This is the core of the temptation, and it is one of the most powerful and insightful passages in all of literature about the nature of the human spirit. The temptation is not, at its heart, for a simple, sensual pleasure. The fruit is not offered as a particularly delicious delicacy. The temptation is for knowledge. It is the temptation to transcend their current state of being, to evolve, to elevate themselves, to achieve a divine level of consciousness. The serpent is offering Eve an alternative narrative, a political interpretation of her reality. He is painting a picture of God not as a benevolent, loving father shielding his innocent children from harm, but as a jealous, insecure tyrant, a cosmic gatekeeper of knowledge who fears the potential of his own creations. God, in the serpent's masterful reframing, is deliberately keeping Adam and Eve in a state of ignorant, childlike bliss because he does not want them to become his peers. He wants them to remain as innocent, unthinking, and therefore eternally pliable and subservient pets in his cosmic zoo. The prohibition in this light is not an act of loving protection. It is an act of divine oppression, a rule designed solely to maintain the absolute power imbalance between the creator and the created. The serpent, in this moment, casts himself in the role of a liberator, a Promethean figure offering to steal the fire of divine knowledge from the jealous gods and give it to humanity. He is offering them the chance to become the protagonists of their own story, rather than remaining as passive, supporting characters in God's story. He is offering them freedom, consciousness, and godhood. And the price is a single act of disobedience. The text then gives us a remarkable and deeply insightful look into Eve's interior world as she processes this radical new information. It is a moment of profound and complex psychological realism. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. This is not a rash, thoughtless, or impulsive act. It is a carefully considered decision based on a threefold analysis that weighs empirical evidence, aesthetic judgment, and philosophical desire. First, she uses her own senses, her own direct empirical observation of the world to evaluate the situation. She sees that the fruit is good for food. It looks wholesome, nutritious, life-giving. She sees that it is pleasing to the eye. It is beautiful, alluring, a perfect work of natural art. Her own sensory evidence, the data she can gather from the world around her, directly contradicts the divine warning. The tree does not look like a thing of death. It looks like a thing of life and beauty. She is, in this moment, the first human empiricist, trusting the evidence of her own senses over the received authority of a disembodied command. Second, and most importantly, she internalizes the serpent's core argument. She recognizes that the tree is desirable for gaining wisdom. This is the crucial, intellectual, and philosophical leap. She is not merely tempted by a physical appetite or an aesthetic attraction. She is drawn by a deep, powerful, and fundamentally human desire. She wants to know. She wants to understand the universe on a deeper level. She wants to see the world as God sees it, to grasp the very concepts of good and evil that structure reality. This is an act of immense intellectual courage and spiritual ambition. She is willing to risk everything, her life, her home, her relationship with her Creator, for the sake of knowledge, for the chance to achieve a higher state of being. In this moment, Eve becomes the tragic protagonist of the human story. She is the first human scientist willing to perform a dangerous experiment to test a hypothesis. She is the first philosopher willing to question the nature of reality. She is the first artist drawn to a thing of beauty. She chooses the difficult, painful path of knowing over the easy, comfortable path of blissful, unexamined ignorance. She chooses to become fully human with all the sorrow and all the glory that such a choice entails. Having made her considered decision, she acts. With a final, decisive act of will, she took some and ate it. It is a simple, declarative sentence, but it is the turning point of all human history within this narrative. The Rubicon has been crossed. The static perfection of Eden, its timeless, changeless harmony, is shattered forever by this single act of willful, curious, and courageous disobedience. And then comes the story's quietest, most understated, and perhaps most damning moment. She also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it. This subordinate clause, who was with her, is a detail of shocking and profound importance. Adam was not off in another part of the garden tending to the animals. He was not absent from the momentous conversation that had just taken place. He was present during the entire exchange. He stood by, silently, and listened to the serpent's subtle, powerful arguments. He watched as his wife engaged in a high-stakes theological debate. He watched her as she weighed her options, as she used her reason and her senses to come to a decision. He watched her reach for the forbidden fruit. He watched her eat it. And throughout this entire world-altering event, he says absolutely nothing. He does not intervene. He does not argue. He does not try to remind her of God's direct and unambiguous command, a command that he had received personally. He is a figure of utter and absolute passivity. His sin is not the sin of Eve. Eve's transgression, while disobedient, is an act of active, intellectual, and courageous, if tragic, rebellion. She is tempted by the promise of godhood and wisdom, and she makes a considered philosophical choice. Adam's transgression is a sin of quiet, shrugging, almost bored complicity. When she, having already eaten, turns and offers him the fruit, he simply takes it and eats. The text offers no record of his thought process, no hint of a struggle or a doubt. He just follows. He is not seduced by knowledge, he is simply led by his partner. This too has been interpreted in multiple ways. Is it a sign of his profound love for her, a conscious decision that he would rather be exiled with her than remain in paradise alone, a tragic act of solidarity that leads him to join her in her fate? Or is it a sign of his fundamental weakness, his abdication of his spiritual and moral responsibility as the first formed, the one who had received the command directly? The text leaves his motivations as a stark and unforgiving blank canvas. But his action is clear and unequivocal. He eats. And with that second, silent bite, the fate of humanity, as this story conceives it, is sealed. Both have now transgressed. Both have chosen the path of forbidden knowledge over the path of unquestioning obedience. The whispers from the tree have done their work with a terrible and beautiful efficiency. The serpent, its catalytic role complete, its philosophical poison now coursing through the veins of humanity, slithers silently and triumphantly out of the narrative, never to be seen again. The man and the woman are now alone together in the garden, but the garden is no longer the same. The air is still, but it is a heavy, pregnant, and expectant stillness. The fruit has been eaten, the knowledge has been ingested, and now in the silence they must wait for its effects to take hold, for the promised opening of the eyes, a divine enlightenment that will feel not like a glorious sunrise, but like the harsh, cold, and unforgiving flash of a terrible, all-too-human dawn. The act was done. The whisper had become will. The temptation had become transgression. The fruit of the forbidden tree, the object around which the entire moral universe of the garden had been structured, had been taken and eaten. First by the woman in a moment of courageous, philosophical desire, and then by the man in a moment of quiet, passive complicity. For a brief, timeless instant after that second bite, the world hangs in a state of profound and terrifying suspension. The air is still. The birds have not stopped singing. The river has not ceased its flow. The fabric of reality has not yet visibly torn. There is only the silent, shared knowledge of the deed, a secret that now binds the two humans together in a new and terrible intimacy. And then, as the last of the forbidden fruit is swallowed, the promised transformation begins. It is not a glorious apotheosis into godhood, as the serpent had suggested. It is a violent and agonizing birth into a new state of being, a state for which they are utterly unprepared. This is the cataclysm of knowing. This is the crime of consciousness. Let us try to imagine the sensory reality of that moment. What did the fruit taste like? The text is silent, but we can imagine it was not its flavor that mattered. The act of eating it was a physical consummation of their intellectual choice. It was the moment the idea of rebellion became an irreversible action, a part of their very flesh. Perhaps there was a sudden, sharp, electric taste, the taste of knowledge itself, a flavor both bitter and sweet, the taste of a truth that is both liberating and devastating. It was the taste of their own freedom, and it was the taste of their own doom. And then, the text tells us, in a sentence of breathtaking and terrible simplicity, then the eyes of both of them were opened. This is the pivotal moment of the entire narrative, the turning point of human destiny. But what does it mean for their eyes to be opened? They could already see. They had seen the beauty of the garden, the shapes of the animals, the face of their creator, and the face of each other. This is not a physical opening of the eyes, but a metaphysical one. It is the opening of the inner eye, the eye of the self. It is the dawn of consciousness as we know it. Before this moment, Adam and Eve existed in a state of unself-conscious unity with the world around them. They were like the animals, living in a state of pure, unmediated presence. They felt hunger, they ate, they felt thirst, they drank. They saw each other, but they did not truly see themselves. Their consciousness was like a placid, clear pool, perfectly reflecting the world without ever being aware of itself as a pool. The eating of the fruit is the stone thrown into that pool. The ripples spread, and for the first time, the pool becomes aware of its own existence, its own depths, its own boundaries. Their eyes are opened, and they see the world in a new and terrifying way. They are no longer simply in the garden, they are now separate from it. The tree is no longer just a tree, it is an object external to them. The bird is no longer just a flash of color, it is another being with another life, wholly separate from their own. And most terrifyingly of all, they see each other in a new way. The woman is no longer just the man's perfect counterpart, she is an other, a separate consciousness with her own thoughts, her own will, a being he can never fully know. And he is an other to her. The perfect, seamless unity of the one flesh is shattered, replaced by the unbridgeable gulf that will forever separate two individual, self-aware minds. This is the birth of alienation, the foundational human experience of being a solitary, conscious self in a world of external objects and other solitary selves. And from this new, shocking awareness of their own separateness, a second awareness is born, the one the text explicitly names, and they realized they were naked. This is the invention of shame. Their physical nakedness is unchanged. Their bodies are the same as they were a moment before. but their perception of that nakedness has been irrevocably transformed. Before, their bodies were simply a part of the natural world, as unremarkable as the fur of a lion or the feathers of a bird. Now, in the harsh, unforgiving light of their new self-awareness, their nakedness is no longer a state of nature. It is a state of profound vulnerability and exposure. To be naked is to be without defense, without disguise. Their bodies, with all their softness, their frailties, their biological functions, are suddenly seen for what they are: fragile, mortal, and animal. But the shame is deeper than just a physical vulnerability. It is a psychological shame. In seeing each other as separate beings, they also realize that they can be seen by each other. They can be judged. The man looks at the woman and is suddenly aware that she is looking at him, that she is perceiving him, that he exists as an object in her consciousness. And she sees the same in his eyes. This is the birth of the self-conscious ego, the part of us that is perpetually aware of the gaze of the other. Shame is the shudder of the self, caught in the headlights of another's awareness. It is the realization that we are not just a subjective I, but also an objective me, a thing to be looked at, to be evaluated, to be found wanting. Their immediate reaction to this horrifying new state of being is the first truly human act of culture, the first act of technology, the first attempt to impose a man-made order on a now threatening reality. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. This is a moment of immense and tragic significance. It is the first labor. Before, the garden provided everything effortlessly. Now they must work, they must gather, they must create. They must manipulate the natural world to serve a new internal need. And what is the purpose of this first technology? It is not to create a tool for hunting or farming, it is to hide. The sowing of the fig leaves is a desperate attempt to cover their newfound vulnerability, to re-establish a boundary between the self and the world, to create a second, artificial skin to protect them from the gaze of the other. It is the beginning of all clothing, all fashion, all artifice. It is the beginning of the human project of constructing an identity, a persona, a public face to present to the world, a face that conceals the true, naked, vulnerable self beneath. But the fig leaves are a flimsy, pathetic defense. They are a fragile, temporary solution to a permanent, existential problem. They can cover the body, but they cannot cover the mind. They cannot erase the terrible knowledge that has now taken root within them. The shame is not on their skin, it is in their soul. The world they now inhabit is a world transformed by their own perception. The garden, which a moment ago was a place of perfect, blissful harmony, is now imbued with a new and menacing quality. Every rustle of a leaf, every shadow cast by a cloud is now a potential source of fear. Their innocence, their state of unthinking grace has been annihilated, and in its place is a new, raw, and terrifying state of being: anxiety. They are now creatures who can anticipate the future, who can dread what is to come, and what they dread most of all is the impending arrival of their Creator. Then, the text tells us, they heard it. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. This sound, which once might have been the most comforting and familiar sound in their existence, the sound of their loving parent coming to visit, is now the most terrifying sound in the universe. It is the sound of approaching judgment. It is the footstep of the landlord coming to evict them. Their reaction is instantaneous and instinctual, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. This is the second great act of hiding, and it is even more profound and tragic than the sowing of the fig leaves. The first act was to hide from each other. This act is to hide from God. The perfect, open, face-to-face communion that had defined their relationship with their Creator is shattered forever. It is replaced by fear, by guilt, and by the futile, childlike impulse to conceal oneself from an omniscient gaze. Imagine the sheer terror and folly of that moment. Two small, naked, self-aware creatures huddled behind a bush, their flimsy leaf aprons rustling with their trembling, trying to make themselves invisible to the being who created the very concept of visibility. It is the birth of religious fear, the birth of the human sense of sin, the feeling of being a guilty, flawed creature in the presence of an all-powerful, all-knowing, and now potentially wrathful, judge. The perfect harmony of Eden is gone. The silence of the garden is now filled with the sound of a beating heart, a heart that has learned to be afraid. The open meadow has become a hiding place. The relationship between humanity and the divine is no longer one of effortless communion. It is one of fear and concealment. The relationship between the man and the woman is no longer one of seamless unity. It is one of shared guilt and mutual exposure. And the relationship of the self to the self is no longer one of simple being. It is one of self-conscious, anxious, and perpetual shame. This, then, is the true nature of the knowledge of good and evil. It is not a list of rules or a set of moral propositions. It is not an intellectual understanding of abstract ethical concepts. It is something far more visceral, far more devastating. It is the experiential knowledge of their own condition. The good they now know is the memory of their lost innocence, the state of blissful, unthinking unity they can now see but can never return to. And the evil they now know is the state they are currently in, the state of separateness, of vulnerability, of shame, of fear. They have not become like God. They have become, in a terrible and ironic way, the very opposite of God. God is a being of absolute unity, self-sufficiency, and power. They are now beings defined by their division, their vulnerability, and their fear. The serpent's promise was a lie, but a lie that contained a terrible, twisted truth. Their eyes were opened, but what they saw was not their own divinity. What they saw was their own humanity in all its fragile, flawed, and tragic glory. They have committed the crime of consciousness. They have murdered their own innocence. And now, as they hide among the trees, listening to the approaching footsteps of their creator, they must face the consequences. The trial is about to begin, but the verdict has, in a sense, already been delivered. The punishment is not something that will be inflicted upon them from the outside. The punishment is the very state of being that they have now, through their own choice, inherited. They have eaten of the fruit of knowledge, and the knowledge itself is the beginning of their hell. The garden is still around them, but paradise has already been lost, because paradise was never a place. It was a state of mind that has now been irrevocably and forever destroyed. The idyllic silence of the garden was now broken. It had been replaced by the sound of rustling leaves, the frantic, shallow breaths of two hiding creatures, and the slow, deliberate, and terrifying sound of approaching footsteps. The cool of the day, once a time of pleasant communion, had become the hour of judgment. The Creator had entered his garden, and his prize creations, the very reason for the garden's existence, were nowhere to be found. They were huddled in the shadows, wrapped in their pathetic, freshly sown fig leaves, their newfound consciousness a leaden weight of terror in their stomachs. The stage was set for the first courtroom drama in human history, a divine interrogation where the defendants were also the sole witnesses and the judge was the victim, the prosecutor, and the ultimate, absolute power. The first word spoken by God after the fall is not a roar of anger, but a question. It is a question that is both simple and laden with a profound, almost tragic irony. But the Lord God called to the man, "Where are you?" This question is theologically immense. It is not a question born of ignorance. An omniscient God, of course, knows precisely where Adam is hiding. He is not asking for geographical information. He is asking a much deeper, more philosophical question. He is asking, "Where are you in relation to me? What has happened to you that you are now in a state of hiding, of separation, a state so alien to the one in which I created you?" It is an invitation to confess, a chance for the man to emerge from the shadows and account for his new, broken condition. It is a question that echoes down through the ages, a question that every human consciousness must, at some point, ask itself. Adam's reply is a masterpiece of fear, shame, and prevarication. He answers, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." This is the first time the word afraid appears in the Bible. It is the new, dominant emotion of the human condition. And notice the structure of his answer. He does not confess to the true crime, the act of disobedience. He confesses to the symptom, his fear. and he gives as the reason for his fear not his guilt, but his nakedness. He is attempting a partial truth, hoping to conceal the greater transgression. He is already learning the human art of the lie, of the carefully constructed, technically true but fundamentally deceptive statement. He is trying to manage the narrative, to control the damage. The creator, of course, is not fooled. His response is another sharp Socratic question, a lawyer's question that cuts directly to the heart of the matter, exposing the lie by interrogating the excuse. "Who told you that you were naked?" God asks. This is a devastating question. How could you know the concept of nakedness as a state of shame unless you have accessed a new, forbidden form of knowledge? How could you know this feeling unless you have violated the one and only prohibition I gave you? God then makes the implicit accusation explicit. "Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" The moment of reckoning has arrived. The crime is known. Adam is cornered, his flimsy excuse shattered. He is now faced with a clear, binary choice: to accept responsibility for his actions, to confess his disobedience and throw himself on the mercy of his Creator, or to attempt to deflect the blame. His choice will set the pattern for one of the most persistent and tragic of all human failings. The text says, "The man said, 'The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate.'" This sentence is a dense, multi-layered masterpiece of cowardice and accusation. It is the birth of the blame game. Let us dissect its poison. First, Adam does not begin by confessing his own action. He begins by implicating the woman. "The woman, she gave me." He immediately casts himself as the passive victim, a mere recipient of the transgressive act, not its willing participant. He attempts to transfer the agency and therefore the guilt from himself to her. Second, in a move of breathtaking audacity, he implicitly blames God himself. He does not just say, "the woman," he says, "the woman you put here with me." The unspoken subtext is damning. This whole mess is not my fault. It is the fault of this other creature, this helper that you, in your wisdom, created and gave to me. If you hadn't made her, none of this would have happened. My solitude was a state of perfect obedience. You introduced this chaotic element, and she is the one who led me astray. It is an act of astonishing arrogance, a creature blaming his own creator for the conditions of his own failure. And only at the very end of this chain of blame shifting does he offer a grudging, minimalist admission of his own action. "And I ate." It is a confession stripped of all repentance, all responsibility, a pathetic footnote to his primary accusations against the woman and against God. The divine gaze then turns to the woman. "Then the Lord God said to the woman, 'What is this you have done?'" The question is direct, an invitation for her to account for her actions. Her response, tragically, follows the pattern set by her husband. She, too, deflects. The woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." Like Adam, she minimizes her own agency. She was not the prime mover. She was a victim of deception, of trickery. The blame is transferred one step further down the chain, to the cunning beast of the field. And like Adam, she ends with the simple, unadorned statement of fact: "And I ate." The first human couple, created for perfect communion, now stand before their God not as a unified pair, but as a circular firing squad of accusation, each pointing the finger at another. The unity of the one flesh has fractured into a terrified and self-serving individualism. The first consequence of the fall is not divine punishment, but the immediate and instinctive human refusal to accept responsibility. The interrogation is over. The facts have been established, the guilt admitted, however grudgingly. Now comes the sentencing. God, acting as the supreme judge, does not pronounce a single sentence upon the humans. He delivers a series of 3 distinct curses, one for each of the culprits, starting at the bottom of the chain of blame and working his way up. This sequence is a formal reversal of the hierarchy of creation. The serpent, the lowest of the beasts, is sentenced first, then the woman, and finally the man. The curse upon the serpent is absolute and damning. "Because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and you will eat dust all the days of your life." This is an etiological curse, a mythic explanation for the biological nature of the snake. The creature that once stood upright and spoke with a silver tongue is now condemned to a life of slithering in the dirt, its mouth filled with the dust of the earth, a symbol of ultimate humiliation. But the curse goes deeper. God declares, "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." This is the famous proto-evangelium, the first gospel, which Christian theology would later interpret as the first prophecy of the coming of a Messiah who would ultimately defeat Satan. But in its immediate context, it is a declaration of perpetual warfare. It establishes a primordial, instinctual hatred between humanity and the serpentine. The relationship is now one of mutual, painful, and unending conflict. The serpent can deliver a venomous, painful strike to the heel of man, but man retains the power to deliver a final, crushing blow to the serpent's head. The creature that offered wisdom and liberation has brought nothing but an inheritance of eternal enmity and violence. The divine judgment then turns to the woman. Her punishment is not a curse upon her being, but a curse upon the two central, defining aspects of her existence as conceived by this ancient, patriarchal culture: childbirth and her relationship with her husband. "I will make your pains in childbearing very severe," God declares. "With painful labor you will give birth to children." The very process that ensures the continuation of the human race, the act of creation that mirrors God's own creative power, will now be inextricably linked with agony. The joy of bringing new life into the world will be forever marred by excruciating, life-threatening pain. This is a curse of terrible, intimate power, weaving suffering into the very fabric of human biology. The second part of her sentence redefines her relationship with the man. "Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." This is a devastating pronouncement. The partnership of equals, the isa konegdo, the helper counterpart, is now formally dissolved and replaced with a hierarchy of domination and submission. The woman's desire for her husband can be interpreted as an emotional and physical longing, but it is a longing that will now be answered not with mutual partnership, but with rule. The man, who just moments before had been a passive follower, is now officially installed as her master. The curse upon Eve is thus the theological and mythological foundation for patriarchy. Her punishment for seeking knowledge and agency is the loss of her equality. The social order is rewritten as a direct consequence of her transgression. The harmony between the sexes is replaced by a structure of power, a structure that will generate its own endless cycles of resentment, struggle, and sorrow. Finally, the judgment falls upon Adam, the man of clay. His curse is aimed at the very source of his being, the earth itself. Because he listened to the voice of his wife and disobeyed the direct command of his God, the ground from which he was taken is now cursed. "Cursed is the ground because of you," God says. "Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field." The effortless paradise of the garden, where food grew freely and work was a form of gentle stewardship, is gone forever. Nature, which was once a benevolent provider, is now a hostile and adversary. The earth will no longer yield its bounty freely. It will resist him. It will produce thorns and thistles, symbols of futility and frustration. Human life will no longer be a state of being, but a state of constant, backbreaking struggle against a reluctant and unforgiving environment. The curse continues, defining the new nature of human labor. "By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food." Work is no longer a joyful act of naming and tending. It is now toil, agon, a painful, exhausting, and relentless necessity for survival. The easy communion with nature is replaced by a relationship of struggle, of man trying to violently wrest a living from a cursed and resistant earth. This is the origin of all human labor, all agriculture, all technology. It is all a consequence of this one primordial act of disobedience. And then comes the final, ultimate, and most terrifying part of the sentence. the confirmation of the very threat that God had issued at the beginning. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. This is the pronouncement of the sentence of mortality. The serpent's promise, you will not certainly die, is revealed to be the ultimate lie. Death, which was only a theoretical warning before, is now an absolute and inescapable certainty. The man of clay will now be unmade, his body destined to decompose and return to the same humble, lifeless dust from which it was formed. The access they had to the tree of life, the source of their conditional immortality, will now be cut off. Their future is no longer an endless, timeless existence in a perfect garden. Their future is now a finite, linear path, a struggle against a hostile earth that leads only and inevitably to the grave. The interrogation is over, the sentences have been passed, the curses have been laid upon the world like a shroud, the serpent will crawl, the woman will suffer in childbirth and be ruled by her husband, and the man will toil against a cursed earth until he dies. This is not just a punishment for a single act of disobedience. This is a comprehensive and devastating rewriting of the rules of existence. The curses are presented as the etiological origin of all the fundamental pains of the human condition. Our fear of nature, the agony of childbirth, the strife between the sexes, the soul-crushing weariness of work, and the final, terrifying reality of our own mortality. The courtroom session is over. The man and woman stand stripped, not just of their clothes, but of their innocence, their immortality, and their home. All that remains is the final, brutal act of exile. The divine judge has passed his sentence, and now the divine executioner will carry it out. The cosmic trial had concluded. The air in the garden, once filled with the scent of blossoms and the sound of life, now hung heavy and still, thick with the weight of judgment. The verdicts had been delivered, the curses spoken into being. The serpent was condemned to the dust, the woman to a life of sorrow and submission, the man to a life of toil and the certainty of a grave. The foundational rules of a new, broken reality had been laid down. But the final act of this divine tragedy was yet to be performed. The guilty had been sentenced, but they had not yet been removed from the scene of the crime. They still stood in the heart of paradise, a place they no longer belonged, their newfound consciousness of shame and fear making every familiar sight a source of fresh agony. The final act was to be the exile, a physical banishment that would make their new internal state of alienation a concrete and geographical reality. Before the expulsion, however, the text records a final, deeply strange and profoundly ambiguous act performed by the Creator. It is an act that can be read as one of profound mercy or of profound cruelty, or perhaps, unsettlingly, as both at the same time. The Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. Let us pause and weigh the immense significance of this single, dense sentence. The man and the woman, in their first act of cultural creation after the fall, had sewn for themselves flimsy coverings of fig leaves. It was a pathetic, desperate attempt to hide their newfound shame from each other. But these leafy aprons were a product of the vegetable world, a fragile and temporary solution. Now, God himself steps in to replace their inadequate handiwork. He fashions for them new garments, garments made not from plants, but from the skins of animals. To read this as an act of mercy is to see it as a gesture of lingering parental care. God sees his flawed, foolish children shivering in their shame and their fear, and he takes pity on them. He understands that in the harsh, new world they are about to enter, a world of thorns and thistles, of sun and of cold, their nakedness is a true vulnerability. The fig leaves are not enough. They need something durable, something strong to protect their soft, mortal bodies from the hostile environment that he has just cursed for their sake. He provides for them, even in his anger. It is the act of a father who, while sending his rebellious child away from home, still packs him a warm coat for the journey. In this view, the coats of skin are a final, sad, and loving gift. But this act requires a terrible price. To create garments of skin, an animal or animals must first be killed. And this, right here, is the first instance of death recorded in the Bible. It is not the natural death of old age, but a death inflicted by violence. And the perpetrator of this first death is God himself. The creator of all life now becomes the first life-taker. He slaughters one of his own innocent creations, a lamb, a goat, a creature that had been given a name by Adam, not for food, not for sacrifice, but to provide a covering for the shame of his two disobedient humans. The blood of an innocent animal is the price of their new clothes. This act shatters the last vestiges of the garden's peace. It introduces the reality of bloodshed and violent death into a world that was, until this moment, entirely vegetarian and peaceful. This casts the act in a much darker light. The coats of skin are not just a gift, they are a grim and bloody lesson. God is showing them, in the most direct and visceral way possible, the consequences of their actions. Their sin has brought death into the world, and they will now wear the physical evidence of that death on their own bodies. The soft, warm fur against their skin is a constant, tactile reminder of the life that was sacrificed to cover their transgression. They are literally cloaked in the consequences of their fall. The garments are no longer a symbol of mercy, but a uniform of their new, fallen state. They have exchanged their flimsy, self-made covering of shame for a divine-made covering of death. They are no longer just gardeners. They are now creatures who benefit from the slaughter of other living things. Their relationship with the animal kingdom, a relationship of benign dominion, is now irrevocably changed. Furthermore, the act can be seen as a final mark of their degradation. They had sought to become like God, who is a being of pure spirit. Their punishment is to be further enmeshed in the world of the flesh of the animal. By clothing them in the skins of beasts, God is symbolically reinforcing their new lowered status. You chose the path of the flesh, of earthly knowledge, the act seems to say, so now you will wear the flesh of beasts as your uniform. It is a permanent mark of their fallen animalistic nature, a replacement of their flimsy but human-made fig leaves with the skin of a dead, non-human thing. Clothed in these new, grim garments, their bodies protected, but their souls heavy with the weight of this first bloody sacrifice, the man and the woman are now prepared for their final expulsion. The divine reasoning for the banishment is made explicit, and it returns us to the two mysterious trees at the center of the garden. The Lord God says, in a passage that sounds like the deliberation of a divine council, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil." This is a stunning and terrifying admission. The serpent did not lie. The central promise of the temptation has been fulfilled. By eating the fruit, humanity has, in fact, acquired a divine quality, the very quality of moral and self-conscious knowledge that separates the Creator from his creatures. But this new status creates an intolerable risk. God continues, he must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. This is the crux of the matter, the final, terrifying calculation of the divine mind. The problem is not that man has gained knowledge. The problem is the potential for a creature who possesses both divine knowledge and divine immortality. A being that knows good and evil, that possesses the capacity for rebellion, for pride, for cruelty, for all the dark potential that this new knowledge contains, but that is also immortal, unkillable, and eternal. Such a creature would be a true and permanent rival to God. It would be a monster, a flawed, dust-born God, an eternal source of cosmic instability. A mortal with divine knowledge is a tragedy. An immortal with divine knowledge is a threat. The exile, therefore, is not primarily a punishment for what they have done. It is a preventative, strategic measure to stop what they might do next. They are not being cast out simply because they are disobedient. They are being cast out to prevent them from acquiring the final component of godhood. The expulsion from the garden is a desperate act of divine damage control. It is an act of cosmic quarantine. The human experiment has gone horribly, dangerously wrong, and now the contaminated subjects must be removed from the laboratory before they can seize the ultimate source of power. And so, the sentence of exile is carried out. So the Lord God banished him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he had been taken. The poetry of this sentence is both beautiful and brutal. He is sent to work the ground from which he had been taken, a phrase that ties his future of painful toil directly to his humble, dusty origin. He is being returned to his source material, not in a gentle, nurturing way, but in a relationship of adversarial labor. He will now spend the rest of his life fighting with the very substance of his own being. Imagine the moment of the expulsion itself. It is a scene of unimaginable trauma. The two humans are driven out from the only home they have ever known, a world of effortless perfection, of gentle breezes and freely available fruit. They are forced to walk away from the familiar paths, the trees they had named, the river whose sound had been the music of their lives. They are walking from a world of being into a world of becoming, from a world of grace into a world of struggle. As they are pushed towards the eastern gate of the garden, they would have looked back one last time, their hearts breaking with a nostalgia for a past that was only moments old but was already lost forever. They are the first refugees, the first displaced persons, the parents of all human homelessness. Their exile is not just a change of location, it is a fundamental shift in their state of being. They are leaving behind a world where they belonged and entering a world where they will be permanent strangers. And to ensure that this exile is absolute and irreversible, God puts in place a terrifying and mythic security system. After he drove the man out, he placed on the east side of the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life. Let us not pass over this image too quickly. These are not the chubby cherubic angels of Renaissance paintings. The cherubim of the ancient Near East were powerful, terrifying, and hybrid beings, often depicted as winged lions or bulls with human faces. They were the guardians of sacred royal spaces, beings of immense and dreadful power, and they are armed with a flaming sword, a weapon that seems to be alive, a blade of pure, divine fire that flashes and turns in every direction. This is not a simple locked gate. This is an active, violent, and supernatural barrier. It is a permanent declaration of no entry. The way back to paradise, the way back to immortality, is now guarded by monsters and by fire. There is no going back. The loss is absolute. The past is a sealed and guarded country to which they can never return. And so they stand, the man and the woman, clad in their grim coats of skin, just outside the eastern gate of their lost home. Before them lies a new world, a world that is now cursed and hostile, a world of thorns and thistles. Behind them, the fiery sword of the cherubim casts a terrible, flickering light, a constant reminder of the paradise they have forfeited. This is the moment that human history, as a narrative of work, family, procreation, and suffering, truly begins. They are now east of Eden, a geographical location that is also a permanent spiritual condition. To be human is to live east of Eden, to live in a state of perpetual exile, haunted by the dim ancestral memory of a perfect home that we can never reclaim. Their first act in this new world is to begin their cursed life. Adam made love to his wife Eve, the text tells us, and she became pregnant. This act, which in the garden would have been an expression of pure, unself-conscious unity, is now freighted with its own curse. Eve will bear a son, Cain, but she will do so through the painful labor that is now her destiny. The first human family is formed not in the blissful innocence of Eden, but in the harsh, sorrowful reality of the fallen world. And the knowledge of evil, the terrible wisdom they paid for with their home and their immortality, immediately begins to bear its bitter, bloody fruit. The story of their children, Cain and Abel, is not a separate tale, but the immediate and inevitable sequel to their own. It is the story of the first sibling rivalry, the first jealousy, the first murder. The sin of disobedience in the garden rapidly metastasizes into the sin of fratricide in the fields of the exiled world. The knowledge of good and evil, it turns out, does not lead to godhood. It leads to a man murdering his own brother in a fit of rage. The tragedy of Adam and Eve is not just their own, it is the inheritance they pass on to all their descendants. They have not just lost their own innocence, they have bequeathed a world of violence, jealousy, and death to their children. They stand now, the progenitors of a broken race, in a world that is fundamentally at odds with them. They must learn to till the soil, to hunt, to build shelters, to protect themselves from the elements and from the beasts of the field. Every mouthful of bread will be earned with sweat. Every child will be born in pain. Every day will be a struggle, a reminder of what they have lost. And at the end of their long, toilsome lives, the final curse awaits them, the return to the dust. This is the new human condition, a condition of profound and unhealable nostalgia. They are creatures who can remember perfection and are therefore uniquely capable of feeling the full, crushing weight of the imperfect world they now inhabit. Their life east of Eden is not just a struggle for survival, it is a long and painful process of grieving for a world that is lost forever, a grief that will become the fundamental, motivating force of all human religion, philosophy, and art. They are no longer the gardeners of paradise, they are the first pioneers of the wasteland, the lonely, haunted parents of us all. The gate to the garden was now sealed, guarded by fire and by beings of terrifying, otherworldly power. The first man and the first woman, cloaked in the skins of the first dead animals, turned their backs on their lost home and began their long, slow walk into the east, into the uncharted wilderness of human history. The story of their personal tragedy was over, but the story of its consequences, its long and deep shadow, was just beginning. The tale of Adam and Eve is more than just a primordial myth. It is arguably the most influential and psychologically potent narrative in the history of Western civilization. For nearly 2 millennia, it has been read not as a fable about two long-dead ancestors, but as a story about us. The events in that garden were not seen as a singular historical incident, but as a foundational, ontological catastrophe, a spiritual cataclysm whose shockwaves have permanently damaged the very fabric of human nature itself. This is the story of their inheritance, an inheritance of dust and of guilt, a legacy that has been formalized into one of the most powerful and terrifying doctrines in the history of religion, the doctrine of original sin. This doctrine, which has profoundly shaped the Western world's understanding of morality, sexuality, governance, and the self, is not explicitly detailed in the text of Genesis itself. The story of Adam and Eve is a story of a personal transgression and its dire consequences for them and their immediate world. But later thinkers, particularly the Christian theologians of the Roman Empire, would read this story through a new and darker lens. The most influential of these was the 4th century North African bishop, Augustine of Hippo. It was Augustine, a man wrestling with his own profound sense of sinfulness and his past life of sensual indulgence, who would take the narrative of the fall and systematize it into a comprehensive and devastating theory of human nature. Augustine argued that the sin committed by Adam and Eve was not merely a personal act of disobedience. It was a crime of such cosmic magnitude that it fundamentally altered the very constitution of humanity. When they ate the forbidden fruit, they did not just fall from a state of grace, they became corrupted in their very essence. Their wills, once naturally inclined towards the good, became permanently biased towards evil. Their reason became clouded, their passions disordered, and most critically, Augustine argued that this corrupted state, this original sin, was not confined to them. It was a hereditary disease, a spiritual and moral defect that is passed down biologically through the act of procreation, from one generation to the next. Every human being, from the moment of conception, is therefore born not in a state of innocence, but in a state of sin. We are not good people who sometimes do bad things. We are, by our very nature, fallen, corrupted, and fundamentally depraved creatures, innately inclined to selfishness, pride, and rebellion against God. The baby in the cradle, in the Augustinian view, is not a symbol of pure innocence. It is a tiny, helpless sinner, already tainted by the ancient crime of its first parents. This doctrine of inherited guilt is a profoundly pessimistic and terrifying view of the human condition. It means that we are born into a state of spiritual damnation before we have even committed a single personal act. We are, in a sense, born guilty. We are prisoners of a crime we did not personally commit, serving a sentence for a primordial transgression. This belief became the central pillar of much of Western Christian theology, particularly in the Catholic and Protestant traditions. It created a worldview in which humanity is seen as fundamentally broken, incapable of saving itself, and in desperate need of an external divine intervention, the grace of God, mediated through the sacrifice of Christ, to rescue it from its own inherently sinful nature. The story of the garden, filtered through the powerful intellect of Augustine, ceased to be an explanation for why life is hard. It became an explanation for why we are bad. The inheritance of this doctrine has been immense and pervasive, shaping the very foundations of Western thought and culture in ways that are often invisible to us, like the water to a fish. Let us consider the specific curses pronounced in the garden and how they became not just mythic explanations, but divine justifications for the structures of our world. The curse upon Adam, "By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food," was interpreted for centuries as a divine sanction for a life of hard, often brutal labor. Work was not seen as a source of fulfillment or dignity, but as a punishment, a necessary and unavoidable part of our fallen condition. This worldview helped to justify social hierarchies. The peasant toiling in the field, the miner chipping away in the darkness, were not just performing a social function. They were living out the curse of Adam, a penance for the original sin. It created a culture where labor was often seen as a grim necessity, a way to beat back the thorns and thistles of a cursed world, rather than as a creative and joyful expression of the human spirit. The curse upon the earth itself, "Cursed is the ground because of you," profoundly shaped the Western relationship with the natural world. Nature, in this view, is not a benevolent mother or a sacred space to be revered. It is a hostile, fallen adversary. It is a wilderness that must be subdued, a chaotic force that must be tamed and conquered by the sweat of man's brow. This mindset provided a powerful theological justification for the exploitation of the natural world. Deforesting the land, damming the rivers, mining the mountains, these were not acts of destruction, but righteous acts of imposing human, and by extension divine, order on a cursed and rebellious creation. The environmental crises we face today have deep roots in this ancient, adversarial relationship with the planet, a relationship that was born in the mythological moment that Adam was cast out to till a hostile soil. The curse upon Eve, "Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you," became one of the most powerful and devastating tools in the construction of patriarchy. This sentence was read not as a tragic description of a broken relationship, but as a divine prescription for the proper social order. The subordination of women to men was not a cultural artifact, not a product of history or social convention. It was God's direct and eternal punishment for Eve's transgression. For centuries, this verse was used to justify the denial of education to women, to bar them from positions of authority in the church and in government, and to enforce a social and legal framework in which a woman was considered the property of her father and then her husband. Eve's sin of seeking wisdom was punished by a sentence of enforced submission, a sentence that was then applied to all of her daughters. The struggle for women's equality has been, in a very real sense, a long and arduous battle against the theological weight of Eve's curse. Furthermore, the story of the fall inextricably linked human sexuality with shame, sin, and guilt. The very first consequence of the new knowledge was the shame of nakedness. The first act of culture was to cover the genitals. Augustine, obsessed with his own struggles with lust, argued that the act of sexual intercourse itself, because it is accompanied by the concupiscent, irrational passions, was the primary vehicle through which the stain of original sin was transmitted from one generation to the next. This created a deep and lasting suspicion of the body and its desires within Western thought. Sexuality was seen as a dangerous, animalistic force, a constant reminder of our fallen nature, a thing to be controlled, repressed, and confined strictly within the bounds of procreative marriage. The joy, the pleasure, and the intimacy of human sexuality were forever shadowed by the memory of the first shameful hiding in the garden. Even our political philosophies have been subtly shaped by this ancient story. The idea, central to the thought of philosophers like Thomas Hobbes, that human beings in a state of nature are inherently selfish and that life is a war of all against all, requiring a powerful, authoritarian state, a leviathan, to impose order and prevent chaos, is a secular echo of the doctrine of original sin. It is a worldview that assumes the innate depravity of humanity and sees governance not as a way to cultivate our natural goodness, but as a necessary cage to contain our innate wickedness. The story of Adam and Eve is the ultimate foundational myth for a politics of suspicion, a belief that humanity cannot be trusted to govern itself without a strong external authority to enforce the rules. But this dark, Augustinian interpretation is not the only way the story has been understood. There has always been a powerful counter-narrative, a more optimistic and paradoxical reading of the fall, an idea known as the felix culpa, the fortunate fall, or happy fault. This interpretation, which has been explored by mystics, poets like John Milton, and theologians, argues that the fall, while a tragedy, was a necessary and ultimately beneficial one. In this view, the state of innocence in the Garden of Eden was not the pinnacle of human existence, but a state of childish, incomplete being. Adam and Eve were good, but they were good in the way that a well-behaved pet or a simple-minded child is good. They were good because they had no other choice. They lacked true moral agency, free will, and the capacity for self-conscious love. Theirs was a world without struggle, and therefore without the possibility of true virtue, which can only be forged in the crucible of moral choice. The fall in this reading was the event that made humanity truly human. By disobeying, they seized their own freedom. By acquiring the knowledge of good and evil, they acquired the capacity for moral struggle. The exile from Eden, in this view, is not just a punishment, it is the beginning of the human adventure. The world of thorns and thistles is the world where real virtues like courage, compassion, perseverance, and sacrifice become possible. The pain of childbirth is the price of a mother's profound love. The toil of labor is the price of creativity and invention. The knowledge of our own mortality is what gives our lives meaning, urgency, and sweetness. And the separation from God is what makes the human quest for reunion with the divine, through faith, through art, through love, a meaningful and heroic struggle rather than a given fact. The fall, in this fortunate reading, was the necessary catastrophe that allowed for the possibility of redemption, for a deeper and more meaningful relationship with God that is based on free, conscious choice rather than on ignorant, blissful obedience. It is the story of how we had to lose a false paradise in order to become worthy of a true one. So in the end, what is this strange and powerful story truly about? Is it the literal history of our first ancestors? Is it a theological treatise on the origins of sin and death? Or is it something deeper, something that speaks to us not as history or as doctrine, but as a profound, psychologically resonant myth about the very nature of our own consciousness? Perhaps the story of Adam and Eve is the ultimate allegory for the birth of the individual human self. The Garden of Eden is the womb, the blissful, unconscious unity of infancy, a world where every need is met and there is no separation between the self and the world. The act of eating the fruit is the moment of awakening, the dawn of self-awareness, the moment a child first realizes that it is a separate being from its mother. This awakening is both a liberation and a terror. It is the birth of the I, but it is also the birth of loneliness, of shame, of the fear of judgment. The exile from the garden is the traumatic but necessary process of growing up, of being cast out of the perfect safety of childhood into the harsh, difficult, and morally complex world of adulthood. The flaming sword is the finality of the past. We can never go home again. The story's enduring power lies in its perfect encapsulation of this fundamental human paradox. We are creatures of dust, bound to a mortal coil, destined to a life of struggle on a beautiful but indifferent planet. And yet we are also creatures made in the divine image, possessed of a consciousness that can contemplate the stars, a will that can choose between good and evil, and a heart that is haunted by a deep, unquenchable yearning for a lost state of grace. We are forever caught between the mud and the heavens. The story of Adam and Eve is not about how we lost paradise. It is the story of how we became ourselves. The inheritance of dust is the price we pay for the crime of consciousness, for the burden and the glory of being human. And it is a story that ends not with an answer, but with a question that hangs in the air of our own post-Edenic world. What will we do with this terrible, beautiful, and dangerous freedom that we have inherited? The gate is closed, the sword is still turning. We stand with our first parents on the east side of Eden in a world of consequence and of choice. The primeval story is over, but our own has just begun. The echoes of their decision are all around us, in our laws, in our loves, in our labors, and in the quiet, persistent human ache for a home we can only remember in our myths. The dust awaits. The path forward is ours to make.